He never liked dogs. Not really. They barked, they shed, they chewed things. But she loved them, especially this one. And now that she was gone, it was all he had left of her. But Elaine loved dogs, especially that dog. The mutt she brought home 5 years ago, smiling like she'd just pulled off the greatest heist in history. He was at the shelter, she said, kneeling down next to the thin, muddy creature. He wasn't even barking, just sitting there, waiting, like he knew I was coming. Her husband, Thomas, had rolled his eyes. You couldn't pick one that didn't look like it escaped from a dumpster? Elaine grinned and whispered to the dog, "Don't listen to him. He'll love you eventually. He just doesn't know it yet." That had been a lie. Thomas never loved the dog. Not when it chewed his leather slippers. Not when it tracked mud across the carpet. Not when it barked at the mailman every morning like it was defending a medieval castle. He tolerated it, because Elaine's eyes lit up whenever she saw it. She named him Duke. Elaine was the kind of woman who talked to plants. Named her succulents. Danced barefoot in the kitchen while making pancakes. She had this effortless joy, like someone who remembered every day was borrowed and refused to waste a second of it. Thomas, on the other hand, lived in spreadsheets and quiet. His world was numbers. Efficiency. He'd never understood how someone could cry over a commercial or laugh alone at a children's book. They were opposites, but they worked. Mostly because Elaine never asked him to change, and he secretly liked the way her chaos softened the edges of his order. Until the diagnosis. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. No warning. No time. She was gone in 7 months. After the funeral, the house fell silent. The kind of silence that pressed against your ears. That made you want to scream just to hear something again. Duke sat by the front door for days. Waiting. Not eating. Barely moving. Thomas ignored him. He couldn't stand looking at the dog. Because Duke had been hers. Every scratch behind his ears, every bedtime kiss, every whispered secret, all of it tied to Elaine. And now the dog just stared at him, like he was waiting for Thomas to say something. He didn't. On the 8th night, Duke whimpered outside the bedroom door. Low, mournful, like grief had learned to speak. Thomas opened the door, ready to yell, but stopped. Duke was lying with his nose pressed against the bottom of Elaine's closet door, just waiting. Thomas's chest tightened. That closet hadn't been opened since the day he'd shut it. Her scarves, her favorite sweater, that worn flannel she used to steal from his side of the closet, it all still lived in there. Untouched. Untouchable. He knelt down. For the first time in weeks, he looked the dog in the eyes. You miss her too, huh? Duke blinked slowly, then pressed his head into Thomas's knee. It was the first time he'd touched the dog willingly. The next morning, something strange happened. Thomas poured himself a cup of coffee and left the mug on the table. He walked away to grab the newspaper from the porch. When he returned, the coffee was gone. The mug was on the floor. Empty. Not spilled. Just drained. He looked at Duke, who was sitting quietly by the door. No foam. No wet paws. No broken mug. He shook his head. Maybe he'd forgotten to pour it after all. That night, as he sat in the living room, Duke stood up and walked over to the fireplace. He sniffed, pawed once at the corner, then sat, staring at a particular spot on the mantel. Thomas squinted. It was a photo, a candid one. Elaine in the garden, covered in dirt, holding a sunflower, laughing. He hadn't noticed that frame before. He walked over, lifted it. Taped to the back was a note. In Elaine's handwriting. If you find this, I hope you're smiling. Don't forget to water the lavender. It hates being ignored, just like me. And take care of Duke. He's not just a dog. He's part of my heart. Love. E. Thomas didn't cry when Elaine died. But he cried now. That night, he let Duke sleep in the bed. And for the first time in months, he didn't dream of hospital beds and beeping machines. He dreamed of pancakes and sunlight and laughter. And Duke, sitting beside Elaine in the kitchen, waiting. Thomas woke up before the alarm. It was the first time in weeks. There was a strange peace in the air, a stillness that felt softer than usual. Duke was curled up at the foot of the bed, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. His tail twitched in a dream, but he didn't wake. Thomas sat up and stretched. His shoulder cracked. He was older now, noticeably so, but for once, he didn't feel heavy. The grief hadn't disappeared, but something had shifted. He looked at the dog. I guess we're roommates now, he muttered. Duke blinked one eye open, then let it fall shut again with a huff. The kitchen still smelled like her. Or maybe it was just memory playing tricks. Her chamomile tea sat unopened in the cabinet. A faded grocery list was still magnet-pinned to the fridge. Every time Thomas saw her handwriting, something in his stomach twisted. But he couldn't bring himself to wipe it away. He reached for the coffee, paused, then smiled faintly and grabbed a second mug. He poured one for himself and one for her. It felt stupid, but it also felt right. Duke patted in and sat quietly by the table. That morning, while scrolling through emails, Thomas found a folder labeled for later on the desktop. He had never seen it before. Inside were documents, letters, videos. One file was named, "In case I go first." His hand trembled slightly as he clicked it. Elaine's face filled the screen. Her hair was thinner. Her smile was smaller. But her eyes, they were still hers. "Hey, love. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. And that breaks my heart. But I don't want you to sit in silence. I know you. You'll shut the world out. So I made sure you can't." She laughed. Then the screen shook as she repositioned the camera. "This is for you and Duke. And no, you don't get to rehome him. I'll come back and haunt you, I swear." Thomas chuckled despite himself. His throat tightened. "I've been training him. Not just tricks. Not sit-stay-fetch stuff. Real things. I taught him your schedule, your habits, your cues. I wanted him to be a part of your routine. I know you're going to hate it. But maybe it'll help. Maybe he'll carry a piece of me with him." The video ended. Just like that. Thomas sat motionless for a long time. That afternoon, he tested it. "Duke," he said quietly, standing near the hallway. "Closet." Duke perked up. He trotted to the bedroom, straight to Elaine's side of the closet, and sat. "Pantry," Thomas said next. Duke walked to the kitchen and sat by the pantry door. "Tea," Thomas whispered. Duke turned, stood on his hind legs just enough to nudge the cabinet where Elaine kept her teas with his nose. Thomas's heart ached. She had trained him. Carefully, quietly, lovingly. She had planned for this. Planned for him to not be alone. Later that evening, Thomas stood in the garden. It was overgrown. The lavender bush was wilting. The little patch she once called her jungle had gone wild without her care. Duke followed him out, sat by her old garden chair, and stared. Thomas looked up. "All right," he muttered. "Let's fix it." He pulled out gloves from the shed, the same ones she used. He trimmed the hedges, dug his hands into the soil, watered the forgotten roots. And all the while, Duke never left his side. 2 days later, the letter came. From a woman named Mira, addressed to Elaine. Thomas opened it slowly. "Dear Elaine, you probably don't remember me. I'm the nurse who saw you and Duke at the hospital garden last spring. You were letting him visit those kids in the pediatric ward, and you told me something I haven't forgotten since. You said, 'Dogs don't just listen. They remember. They carry us with them.' That line stuck with me. I just wanted you to know that one of those kids, Ava, still talks about your dog." He made her laugh in the middle of chemo. "I hope Duke is well, and that wherever you are, you're smiling." Thomas set the letter down with shaking hands. He never knew she took Duke to the hospital. Never knew she visited children. Never knew the extent of her quiet kindness. He looked at the dog now, lying by the window, staring into the fading sun, and something in him broke, gently. She had left pieces of herself in the world. In the soil. In children. In letters. In Duke. And Duke was carrying it all. That night, Thomas opened her old journal. He'd been avoiding it, afraid it would wreck him. But as he turned the pages, he found an entry dated just a month before she passed. "Tom doesn't like Duke. I can tell. But I think one day he'll see what I see. Duke doesn't just love. He reflects it. He'll show Tom the version of me that loved him most. I just hope he gives him the chance." Thomas closed the journal with trembling fingers. Then he bent down, gently placed a hand on Duke's head, and whispered, "Okay, boy, let's see what you've got to show me." It started with lavender. The bush by the fence had always been Elaine's pride. She once told a neighbor it smelled like calm and laughed like it was the greatest secret on earth. Now, under Thomas's care, it had started blooming again. He wasn't good at it, not like she had been. He overwatered, got the pruning all wrong, and swore more than he should when thorns bit into his hands. But every time he stepped into that garden, Duke followed without fail, sitting by the same chair Elaine used to drag around from spot to spot. It was strange, really. Every morning, Duke would sit by the door right at 7:30, wagging his tail once, waiting for Thomas to come outside. Eventually, Thomas stopped questioning it. He just followed the dog. Then came the neighbors. It started with Mrs. Alvarez from next door. She spotted Thomas kneeling in the dirt one morning and called out from her porch, "Well, look who's finally playing in the mud." Thomas gave a small smile, trying not to kill everything. She laughed. Elaine would have been proud. She always said you'd come around once you realized dirt doesn't bite. He almost said something, but Duke trotted over to her fence and stood on his hind legs, tail wagging wildly. Mrs. Alvarez leaned down to pet him, but paused. "Wait, is that her scarf?" Thomas blinked. He hadn't noticed it before, but wrapped neatly around Duke's neck was a soft, lavender-colored scarf. Elaine's, one she used to wear every spring. He didn't put it there. Later, Thomas rummaged through the hall drawer where Elaine used to keep scarves and gloves. The scarf wasn't there, but beside a jar of buttons was a note in Elaine's handwriting. "If you ever let him outside alone, he'll find the scarf. I tucked it under the flower pots. Told him to guard it. He listens better than you ever did." Thomas laughed, then cried, silently. The next day, a little girl showed up at the gate. She was maybe 8. Freckles, holding a drawing. "Hi," she said. "Are you the man with the dog?" Thomas blinked. I guess." She held up the paper. It was a messy crayon picture of Duke standing next to a stick figure in a dress. "Your dog used to come visit my sister in the hospital. She's better now." She said the dog made her laugh when nothing else did. Thomas stared. "I wanted to say thank you." And just like that, she ran off. He looked down at Duke. "You've been busy." Duke wagged his tail. That night, Thomas opened the garage. Elaine's art supplies were still there. Easels, canvases, tins of old brushes. She used to paint sunsets and animals, and once did an entire series of Duke in ridiculous hats. He found one of those paintings leaning against the wall. It was Duke, sitting in a bowler hat, looking smug. Written underneath in curly handwriting, "Best boy." He carried it inside. Over the next week, Duke's habits became clearer. At 10 a.m., he'd nudge the guest room door. At 2 p.m., he'd whine near the living room record player. At sunset, he'd sit by the garden, facing west, as if watching something only he could see. Each time, Thomas followed. And each time, there was something new. In the guest room, a stack of children's books Elaine used to read during volunteer work. By the record player, an old vinyl labeled Elaine's Mix, Rainy Days Only. In the garden at sunset, a small stone marker beneath the lavender bush that read, "Planted with love, to be remembered in bloom." She'd left messages everywhere. But more than that, she'd left Duke to guide him to them. One night, the power went out. A thunderstorm rolled in, wild and sharp. Thomas lit candles and moved to the living room, Duke close at his heels. When the thunder cracked, Duke didn't bark. He walked over to the fireplace and pawed at the basket where Elaine used to keep her knitting things. Thomas reached in and found a flashlight, and under it, a sealed envelope. His name was on it. He hesitated, then opened it. "Tom, I know you. You're stubborn. You don't believe in signs or fate or love that lingers. But if you're reading this, it means Duke's done his job. He brought you back to me, or at least to the parts one left behind. I hope by now you've laughed once, tended the garden, found the lavender. I hope you felt me in the wind, in Duke's stare, in the music. And if you're still not sure what to do next, let him take you. He knows the way. Always yours, E." Thomas pressed the letter to his chest. Outside, rain fell like memory. Duke sat by the window, ears perked. He was waiting. The morning after the storm, Thomas awoke to a sound he couldn't quite place. Not barking, not whining, scraping. He shuffled out of bed, still groggy, and found Duke in the hallway, pawing gently at the coat closet. Thomas frowned. He opened the door. Inside, hanging untouched since Elaine's passing, was her old red raincoat. Faded, frayed at the edges. And in the side pocket, a folded map. Not a printed one, a hand-drawn sketch. Elaine's handwriting in the corners, along with doodles of pine trees, clouds, and a crooked heart at the top labeled, The spot. Thomas stared at it. There was an arrow pointing to a hill just outside of town, near an old trail they used to walk, back before life got complicated. He looked down at Duke. You sure about this? Duke barked once, tail wagging. That was answer enough. By midday, they were driving. Thomas hadn't used the truck in weeks. Dust coated the dashboard. The air was stale, and Duke sat in the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times. He probably had, with her. The trailhead was quiet. Trees swayed gently, brushing the edges of memory. Thomas parked and stepped out, the map clenched in one hand. Duke leapt down, nose to the ground, ears alert. The path wasn't easy. Roots crisscrossed like traps. Mud sucked at his boots. Birds chirped, high and carefree, a contrast to the heaviness in his chest. And Duke led the way, never straying. After nearly an hour of slow climbing, they reached it. A clearing, sun-drenched, wind-touched, overlooking the valley below. Elaine used to call it God's porch. She brought a sketchbook here once and stayed for hours, drawing trees and clouds and Thomas when he wasn't looking. In the middle of the clearing, someone had planted wildflowers, purple, yellow, and soft blue, circling a small wooden bench. He didn't recognize the bench, but Duke trotted straight to it and sat. Thomas followed slowly. A small plaque was nailed to the backrest, hand-carved, to the one who stayed. Come here when you miss me. He sat, and for the first time in months, he exhaled. The view stretched for miles. He could see the curve of the town, the glint of the river, the garden rooftops where lavender bloomed. And he imagined her here, smiling, sketching, humming to herself like she always did when the wind touched her hair just right. He pulled the folded letter from his coat, the one he'd almost forgotten. It wasn't signed, just 4 simple lines, in her looping script. When grief is heavy, let love be light. You'll find me waiting, where the hills kiss the sky. He read it again, and Duke rested his head in Thomas's lap. They stayed for hours, not talking, just being. At one point, Thomas leaned back and looked at the sky. I hated that you trained him, he whispered. Felt like you were trying to control me from beyond the grave. Duke snorted softly. But now I see it. You weren't controlling me. You were guiding me back to life. Duke licked his hand once, then lay still. As they walked back down the trail, something was lighter. Not gone. Grief doesn't leave like that. But softened, carried. And it wasn't until they reached the truck that Thomas noticed something tied to Duke's collar. A charm. Oval. Silver. Engraved. He lifted it and read. Thank you for loving him when I no longer could. He didn't know when she put it there. He didn't know how he hadn't noticed before. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He pressed his forehead gently to Duke's. Let's go home, boy. The days that followed felt different. Not brighter. Grief doesn't fade like that. But softer. Like life had stopped screaming and started whispering again. Thomas began to move with intention. He started each morning by walking Duke through the garden, watching bees drift lazily through the lavender. He didn't just water the plants anymore. He talked to them, just like she used to. All right, Fern, let's not die this week, yeah? It felt foolish, but it also felt like breathing again. The guest room, long sealed off like a tomb, was the next step. He opened the door. The air was stale with stillness. Elaine's folded quilt still sat on the bed. Her childhood books on the shelf. Photos of her parents, old concert tickets, a worn notebook labeled Ideas for Retirement, filled with doodles, plans, little jokes. She had scribbled at the top of one page. Things I'll do if I live to 80. Learn the ukulele. Grow tomatoes. Make Tom wear Hawaiian shirts. Daily. Thomas smiled and cried. But this time, the tears didn't shatter him. They just flowed. Duke patted in behind him and dropped something gently at his feet. An old tennis ball, chewed nearly to the core. Thomas blinked. Where did you? He recognized it. Elaine had bought it years ago, not for Duke, but as part of a gag gift. She had drawn a face on it and called it Stress Steve. Whenever Thomas was overwhelmed, she'd chuck it at him playfully and yell, "Go walk it off with Steve." He hadn't seen that ball in ages. Yet here it was. Duke wagged once. Elaine, it seemed, still had jokes to tell, even from the quiet corners of the past. That weekend, something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. Thomas opened it to find a woman standing nervously on the porch. Early 30s, thin frame, soft eyes. She held a leash in one hand, and at the end of it was a trembling puppy, all ears and awkward paws. "Hi," she said. "You don't know me, but my name's Kayla. I'm from the shelter. Elaine used to volunteer with us." Thomas nodded, unsure where this was going. "She left a note with us, just in case." Kayla reached into her pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Elaine's handwriting. Again, Thomas's hands shook as he opened it. "Tom, if Duke's still with you, and you're still reading my letters, it means I was right. That you stayed. This little guy, his name is Milo. He's anxious, nervous, a bit of a mess. But I think he needs someone who understands that grief takes time. And maybe you're not just surviving anymore. Maybe you're ready to start helping someone else survive, too. I trust you. Love always. E." Thomas looked down at the puppy. Milo's legs were trembling. His head ducked low, but his eyes, wide and hopeful, locked onto Duke. Duke sniffed once, then gave a quiet huff. Not annoyed, not curious, just accepting. Kayla smiled. He doesn't trust people, but he's good with other dogs. Elaine spent a lot of time with him before everything. Thomas looked back at her, then at Duke, then at the quivering pup. He knelt down slowly. Milo backed up, but then Duke took a step forward and nudged Milo gently with his nose. Milo stopped shaking, just a little. An hour later, Milo was curled up on the living room rug. Duke lay beside him, a quiet guardian. Thomas stood in the doorway, staring. The house, once filled with silence and memory, was now full of new breath. Soft puppy snores, paw steps on tile, water lapping from bowls, and something else, too. Movement, not just of bodies, but of healing, of time, of heart. That night, Thomas lit one of Elaine's old candles, lavender and sage, and sat by the fireplace. 2 dogs curled at his feet now. He opened one more envelope she'd left, this one tucked behind the record player, labeled simply, "In case you bring someone new home." Inside was a photo of her holding Duke as a puppy, both of them soaking wet from rain, both of them laughing in their own way. On the back, she'd written, "Love isn't a one-time thing. It's a garden. You water it. You watch it grow in others." He put the photo on the mantel, and for the first time, the house didn't feel like a shrine. It felt like home. Winter came quietly that year. The leaves changed without fanfare. The skies grayed, and the air began to smell like wood smoke and memory. But inside the little house on Elm Street, there was warmth. Not just from the fireplace, or the wool blankets, or the stew Thomas had finally learned to make without burning, but from something deeper. Life had returned. Thomas no longer moved through his days like a ghost. Now he lived them. Duke had slowed down. The gray in his muzzle had deepened. He didn't run like he used to. He needed help climbing into the truck now. But his eyes still had that same knowing light, the one that never left. Milo, on the other hand, was a tornado in training. All legs, all energy, and absolutely no sense of personal space. He followed Duke everywhere, slept next to him, mimicked him, and Duke, patient and silent, led him. Sometimes, Thomas would watch them and shake his head. "She trained both of us, didn't she?" He'd whisper, and Duke would look up, as if to say, "Of course she did." Then came the snowfall. It blanketed the world in white, muffling the noise of everything. And on the first heavy night, Thomas took the dogs out to the porch. Milo bounded ahead, leaping into snowbanks like a lunatic. But Duke didn't move. He stood perfectly still, nose lifted, eyes fixed on the sky. Thomas walked to his side. "Something wrong, old man?" Duke didn't respond, just sat and stared. And in that moment, Thomas knew. Not in a fearful way, not in panic, just knew. That night, Duke didn't eat much. He curled up beside the fire, like always. But this time, his head rested on Elaine's scarf. Thomas knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. "You did good, you know that?" he whispered. "You kept your promise." Duke's tail tapped once. Then silence. The morning came slow and blue. Milo was the first to move, sniffing Duke and whimpering softly. Thomas followed. And when he saw the stillness in Duke's body, the perfect, peaceful stillness, he sat beside him, laid a hand on his fur, and cried. long and quiet, not from panic or loneliness, but from love, from gratitude. He buried Duke in the garden, right under the lavender bush Elaine had loved. He carved a simple stone himself, hands trembling, tears soaking into the soil. Duke, the best boy, she loved you. So did I. Milo sat beside him the whole time. No barking, no fidgeting, just presence, just like Duke had once done for him. Winter passed. Spring returned, as it always does. And one morning, Thomas stepped into the garden with Milo and saw something strange. The lavender was blooming early. Not just blooming, flourishing, wilder than ever. And there, tucked beneath the base of the bush, was a piece of paper. A little faded, edges curled. He picked it up carefully. Elaine's handwriting. If he's gone now, I hope you're not alone. I hope you remember that love doesn't end. It roots. And it grows again. In wagging tails. In garden dirt. In laughter. He carried my love to you. You'll carry it forward. Thank you, Tom. For loving him. For letting yourself be loved. He folded it slowly and pressed it to his heart. Years later, people still talk about the man with the two dogs. One who walked slowly. One who bounced like lightning. They talk about how he volunteered at the shelter. How he adopted the tough cases. How his garden looked like something out of a painting. Some say he talks to the flowers. He does. Every day. And sometimes, just sometimes, he swears he can hear her voice in the wind. One afternoon, a boy walking past asked, "Mister, how come your dog wears a scarf?" Thomas smiled, knelt down, and said, "Well, someone gave it to him. A very special someone. And the love? It never left. It simply found new ways to be held. In paws. In petals. In people who choose to love again. Even when it hurts. Because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're just places where love takes root. And grows all over again."
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our pawsome friends.